Hello and welcome to another discussion in the series regarding mergers and acquisitions, which is being presented by the San Diego corporate law firm of George P. Shenas, Incorporated. I'm George Shenas, and today it's my privilege to be joined by two gentlemen. Gary Gist, to my right. Gary is now the chairman of the Board of Intersil Corporation, which is a NASDAQ company involved in technology products. Bob Brendel, to the left, is the outgoing president of T-Systems International, which is a company that has recently been sold in the latter part of 2008 to the John Deere Corporation. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George.
Now, you and I had talked about the importance of enhancing the basic value of the company by tending to your knitting as far as establishing sound systems within the organization. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, a buyer is going to come in and be very, very critical of everything in the organization in terms of can they believe what you're telling them. So your systems, whether they're financial, manufacturing systems, inventory valuations, have to be very, very professional and very clean in terms of their transparency so that a buyer can come in, look at them, and the numbers are believable.
Let's turn, if we can, to the role and the focus that a CEO should adopt at the commencement of an M&A process and during the course of the M&A process. What is the role of the CEO, or what are the various roles of the CEOs that a CEO must pay attention to in order to improve and enhance the bargaining power of the seller, or preserve the bargaining power from erosion during the course of the M&A process? What knitting should the CEO, if you will, attend to during this process? What's your main jobs?
Well, I think that you have to maintain the strength of the core values in the corporation. That has to be consistent throughout the process in order to validate what you're trying to communicate to the buyer. And as the leader of the organization, you have to be the funnel of communication in terms of how the business plan will be communicated to be able to leverage that core value.
Going back even earlier in the process, I would imagine that a person in the position of the CEO can be of invaluable help to the investment banker, if one is involved, in identifying buyers who might be a good fit that might not otherwise be obvious to the investment banker. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's very important, especially for financial buyers. But as the CEO of a company, you really need to know who the players are in your industry, because those are the ones that you have to be on very familiar grounds with, so that when the time comes to sell the company, you know exactly who would be the most interested in your company, and allows you to create some competition in trying to sell the company. The investment bankers really are the front guys, you might say, in going out and talking to that community, but they will also know financial buyers that you may not know, who might be very interested in doing an acquisition for totally different reasons than you may think about, non-strategic reasons, you might say.
Absolutely. As Gary said, as a CEO, you should be able to sit down within your industry and come up with a list of an A list of strategic buyers, a B list, and a C list. Take a half an hour, write them down, and you know exactly what the positives and negatives would be with each buyer.
Now, are you as CEOs, or is a typical CEO a good source of identification of risk factors that the company needs to deal with in order to most affirmatively situate itself as a seller in the marketplace? Or is the CEO somehow compromised by subjectivity? Does it take somebody else?
I think the risk factors are really more when you're on the buy side. and you're looking at the company on the sell side, the risk, you can mitigate the risk factors, you know, in how you negotiate the contract and the kinds of buyers that you deal with.
My point, though, Gary, is in the process of preparation to sell, the seller needs to identify those risk factors early on before it ever hits the marketplace, in order to be able to deal with them, mitigate them, eliminate
Oh, you're
them,
talking about
and the
risk
like.
factors in performance, those kinds of issues, I think.
Or
in
potential
structure.
exposure to liability that might be needed to be dealt with.
Mhm,
These
mhm,
types
mhm.
of things. I think a CEO can play, and a CFO for that matter, can play an important role in identifying and then trying to mitigate them before
Well,
you hit the ground.
Yeah, as a seller and as a CEO seller, you need to make sure that you never surprise a potential buyer. That whatever you say will happen happens month after month after month. If you give a forecast that your sales for the next 2 months are going to be X, then you need to have that forecast dead on so that you meet X. Because it's so easy to create doubt in the mind of a buyer in this process that only the CEO can really monitor that. He needs to be the guy who delivers that information. Therefore, he knows, you know, what information is being received by a potential buyer, and he can help meet those goals.
That's part of a broader thing. I mean, of simply the chemistry of the deal.
Mhm.
And the CEO
Mhm.
can play an enormously valuable part in that. Maintaining confidence, maintaining a nice, warm, but business-like feeling vis-a-vis your counterpart. This is so important, the subjective aspect of closing
Right.
a deal.
In addition to what Gary said, if there is anything negative during the process, the CEO needs to be the one to communicate that to the buyer before the buyer finds it on his own. Because if it is a negative, the CEO needs to present it and provide what the background of it is so that the buyer doesn't start to lose any kind of faith in the validity of what he's saying.
Or start to renegotiate the terms of the deal and drive the price down in the
Well,
process.
that's a given. That's a given. When you surprise a buyer, you will. In fact, you've got to figure out how to get the value back
That's right.
at
My-
that particular
yeah.
point.
My
It's very
theory has
difficult.
always been that if you have a negative factor, and if you present it up front, while the buyer is, let's say, in heat, okay,
Mhm.
they'll roll that in. They'll and the seller can always point to the fact that the buyer knew of this at the very outset, and that the price proposed at that time
Mhm.
took this into
That's
account.
important.
If that same issue comes up downstream, you're in real trouble because
Yeah, you're gonna- what happened? Yeah.
that value is going to be impacted. There's no doubt about it. Thank you, gentlemen, for the information. I hope that the audience will join us for a continuation of this discussion in the near future.